Everyone's familiar with the infamous Trail of Tears, in which several southeastern Native American tribes are relocated by force during harsh winter weather to the Indian Territory, now Oklahoma, in the 1830s. Today we tell the story of the incident that likely precipitated that forced removal. Hello folks, I'm Steve Gilly, along with Rod Mullins, and this is another one of the Stories of Appalachia.
You know, Steve, I think it's interesting that you bring this story up. Just the other night, my wife and I were talking about, we were talking about one, I think during all the storm coverage they had on television, on the internet, they brought up a town in Tennessee that, I told my wife, I said, oh, that's Native American. I can tell by the, the sound, the pronunciation of it and so forth. And then I decided to look it up and just see where it came from. And there were so many different names in there. And one of the things that jumped out at me was the number of people today that actually speak the Cherokee language as opposed to what used to be. And also, there's only two locations in this country that use it. One is in Cherokee, North Carolina, just across the state line from Tennessee, and the other is in the Oklahoma Territory, in Oklahoma just itself. And it's kind of wild that you bring this story up because we're going to talk about something that involved the Cherokee Nation and really Cherokee politics in general, didn't it?
Yeah, it did indeed. And we've talked about the Trail of Tears. We've talked about several other aspects of this, but today we're going to talk about one man whose untimely death may have actually, accelerated the removal of the Cherokee from North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, west to Indian Territory, now Oklahoma. Now, Jack Walker Jr. was the son of a prosperous Cherokee man who owned a large farm and operated a ferry in Calhoun, Tennessee. Jack himself was a college-educated man and married to two women at the same time, one white and one Cherokee, a blending of cultures that characterized many families in the region.
Well, Steve, Jack was very much involved in Cherokee affairs, particularly in the issue of controversial issue of removal. He believed that selling their ancestral lands and relocating west of the Mississippi was the only path to preserving Cherokee independence. Now, you might have heard that and thought, no, he wasn't for that. Oh, he was. That was the only way that he felt like they needed to be able to preserve their independence. Not everyone agreed with Walker's stance, though, as you can imagine. Anti-removal sentiment ran high among the Cherokee, leading to tensions and even calls for violence against pro-removal advocates like Jack Walker, I should say, and others. Early in 1834, Walker clashed with two Cherokee men, James Foreman and Anderson Springston, over an illegal whiskey shipment. This incident fueled a personal feud, compounded by their opposing views on the topic of removal. On August 23rd, 1834, as Walker and his companion, Dick Jackson, were returning from a council meeting at Red Clay, Tennessee, they were ambushed by Foreman and Springston near Walker Valley in present-day Bradley County. Walker was shot in the left breast.
Now, despite being rushed home for medical care, Walker's condition worsened over the next 19 days until he passed away on September 11th. His murder sparked fear in the Cherokee community as it was seen to be an assassination over the issue of forced removal. Jack's father, John, accused Chief John Ross and others of orchestrating that murder and threatened to kill Ross, leader of those against removal, in retaliation. Other removal advocates like Major Ridge immediately grew concerned that the tribe was about to descend into outright civil war over the issue and that they too could be targets of assassins. Ridge's fears soon came true, as there were many pro-treaty advocates murdered by supporters of John Ross.
Well, when Old Hickory, President Andrew Jackson, got wind of these killings, he immediately had Ross notified that he would hold Ross personally responsible for the safety of pro-removal members of the tribe. The aftermath of Walker's murder brought swift legal action by McMinn County authorities. Well, Sheriff Spence Beavers apprehended foremen in Springston, who were then taken to the jail in Athens, Tennessee, to face trial, which began on November the 4th, 1834, presided over by Judge Alexander Keith. Defense attorney Spencer Jarnigan wasted no time in challenging the legality of the trial, arguing that the 1833 law under which the defendants were charged was unconstitutional. He contended that since the incident occurred within the Cherokee Nation boundaries, only Cherokee laws applied, not those of the state of Tennessee, by the terms of prior treaties with Tennessee and the United States. Well, after a rigorous 3-day trial, Judge Keith ruled in favor of the defendants, citing the sovereignty of the Cherokee Nation within its borders. He also determined that an act passed by Congress extending the jurisdiction of the states over the Indian Territory to be unconstitutional and void.
In other words, Rod, the Cherokee were a sovereign nation on equal footing with the states, and by extension, the United States. Now, the prosecution promptly filed an appeal with the Tennessee Supreme Court, setting the stage for further legal wrangling and deeper examination of the relationship between native nations and the states. The arguments of that appeal happened at Tennessee Supreme Court hearing the case in Knoxville, where Judges Jacob Peck, Nathan Green, and John Catron presided. But it was Judge Catron's ties to President Andrew Jackson that would cast a shadow over the proceedings. You see, Judge Catron was not just a jurist, he was a political associate of President Jackson, who had made it clear that he intended to remove the Cherokee to Indian Territory, now known as Oklahoma, by any means necessary. This political connection deeply influenced Catron's perspective in this case, and, well, despite numerous previous rulings acknowledging Cherokee sovereignty and rights, Catron's allegiance to Jackson's agenda led to a significant shift in his legal views toward the tribe, didn't it, Rod?
It did, Steve, because in the Foreman case, Catron's opinion was that the Cherokee were a conquered people and not a sovereign nation, and thus subject to state laws rather than their own. Well, this ruling was supported by Judge Green and opposed by Judge Peck. Essentially, it undermined Cherokee legal autonomy. What started out as a murder trial had suddenly turned into a means by which Andrew Jackson could proceed with his plan to remove the tribe to the west. The murder case, though, was appealed to the United States Supreme Court, but mysteriously, there's no record of it ever being heard. This historical gap leaves us pondering whether the case vanished or was deliberately overlooked amid larger political dealings. Who knows? I mean, there's no record of it anywhere, is there, Steve?
Not that anybody can find. No, that's true. But, you know, Rod, before we finish this story up, let's dig a little deeper into the tragic aftermath of the legal and political battles that we've just talked about. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 is central to this story, granting the president sweeping powers to forcibly relocate Native American tribes to distant lands in the West away from white settlement. But a landmark legal case was heard in 1832, and we've done a separate podcast about this, the one that was called WorcesterVs.Georgia. And in that case, the U.S. Supreme Court, under Chief Justice John Marshall, affirmed Cherokee sovereignty and declared the Indian Removal Act to be unconstitutional. However, President Jackson didn't care. He refused to uphold the court's ruling, determined to move the remaining southeastern Indian tribes to the west and open up new lands for white settlement in Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. Major Ridge, John Ridge, Elias Boudinot, and Stan Waddy signed the Treaty of New Dakota in 1835, which mandated the Cherokees' removal to Indian Territory in Oklahoma in return for $5 million and 7 million acres of land in the West.
Despite the widespread opposition and pleas from Cherokee leaders like John Ross, who, by the way, had his home and his land taken from him by Georgia officials while he was away fighting removal and given to white men in a lottery, Congress, in the meantime, ratified the treaty by a narrow margin, setting the stage for the forced removal known as the Trail of Tears beginning in the winter of 1838. Now, because of the murder of one Cherokee man, the U.S. government gained the legal cover to force thousands of Cherokee to move west, enduring unimaginable hardships and loss. Some defied relocation, holding out in the mountains of western North Carolina and East Tennessee, eventually leading to the formation of what we referred to earlier was the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Nation. And it's sad. I go back and I think of this, and I often wondered why we had all these Indian reservations out west. So that was one of the things when I was younger. Why did we have these Indian reservations? And then when I started finding out about the Trail of Tears and, eventually how they tried to, appease, so to speak, the Indians, I guess, from, speaking out about this sort of thing, I found out more about the Trail of Tears, and it was not a very pretty picture in our history.
Well, the Trail of Tears was actually the start of getting reservations set up, I do believe.
Yeah.
Basically, the reservation system is just a way to move the natives off the land into a smaller and smaller area so that the settlers could take that land over. And that's just been part of our history. Now, the person that most people focus on in this is Andrew Jackson. It's hard to imagine, most presidents just defying what the Supreme Court said. I think one of the things he said was, well, get you an army and come and fight me. Otherwise, I'm not going to pay any attention to what your ruling is. We're going to take care of this issue, and we're going to move those Indians out west. I guess definitely Jackson's low point right there.
I'd like to see how Jackson would have performed in today's standards with a Congress, the way that this Congress and so forth, the way that, both political parties have been. I just wonder what in the world Andrew Jackson would have done in a situation like that if, you had these kind of similar situations. But I guess I'm kind of digressing here for a moment. I guess this Congress was sort of like what we kind of endure. They're kind of split. They're trying to go one way, one's trying to go another. Of course, that's the way political parties work, but Andrew Jackson just didn't make it easy on himself, and then, like you said, he just kind of stood up, and I guess that's the reason why he earned the nickname Old Hickory. He wasn't going to bend, and he wasn't going to break, and he kind of stayed put on what he believed in, and that was it.
Well, legal or illegal.
Right.
That's basically it. And today, if he were here, I think he'd probably be doing the same thing, to be quite honest with you.
Probably. And I wonder how many of these congressmen he'd actually go up to the Capitol building, yank out of their seats, and whip them with a stick. That could happen,
And that, folks, is the story of a murder case that sent a nation into exile. Another one of the stories of Appalachia. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our stories. We're on Spreaker, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Till next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.
So long.